Hi, and welcome to episode number 14 of the Gentle Business Revolution podcast, the show where we talk about marketing your business by disrupting the current marketing paradigm. I'm Sarah Croce, your host here. I don't know when's the last time I told you about my last name. I think it must have been on the previous show, so I want to just interject that here. My last name, Santa Croce, is Italian. It's from my lovely husband, who's from Sicilian origin, born and raised in Canada. And it means Holy Cross, so Santa means holy, and Croce means cross. And it's spelled Santacroce. And most people misspell it, but I don't care because I find it a beautiful last name, especially if people know how to pronounce it in Italian, which would be Santa Croce. There you go. You know that you're in the right place if you are a heart-centered entrepreneur who is looking for a better way to market your business, or you are an entrepreneur who is just simply fed up with the traditional hype-y marketing model and are ready for a paradigm shift. And today I have a returning guest, my friend Tom Schwab, who has been a guest on the previous version of this podcast when it was still called the Introvert Biz Growth Show. So yes, Tom is a dear fellow introvert. And in the previous episode, which you'll find at sarahsantacroce.com/episode 46, we talked mainly about him being an introverted entrepreneur in the podcasting business. But today I invited him back to have him share some of his wisdom around being a guest on other podcasts with us. I find this to be an excellent marketing strategy because it's based on giving, on storytelling, and on serving a new audience. So stay tuned and make sure you take notes because he really shares a lot of nuggets in there. But first, here's what it says in Tom's official bio. In this noisy digital world, you can't break through the noise, you just add to it. Instead, you need to get in on the conversation where your ideal customers are already listening. As a Navy veteran who ran nuclear power plants and an inbound marketing engineer, Tom Schwab has a refreshingly unique approach. He focuses on time-proven strategy, then supercharges it with today's technology and podcast interview marketing. An author, speaker, and host of the podcast Guest Profits show, Tom helps you get more traffic, leads, and raving customer fans by being interviewed on targeted podcasts. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Tom. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Sarah, I am thrilled to be here.
I'm so glad to have you back on the show. Yay. You have been a guest on the previous version because you're a fellow introvert. So you get the honor to be back.
I am thrilled to be here. The only thing that'd be better is sitting down and talking in real life, but it's amazing the tools we have today.
I know, right? So on the last episode, we talked mainly about you being an introvert and how that, feels like in your business and all of that. But today I want to actually talk about your expertise, which is podcast guesting, right? Not necessarily hosting your own podcast, but you help your clients with podcast guesting. Do you want to talk a bit about how you got into that specific niche? Because it's, that has probably recently developed because podcasts didn't always exist.
Well, maybe it comes out of the introvert thing that I didn't have the confidence to go out there and start my own show. And also, anybody that says doing a show is easy has either never done it or never done it well. The great ones just make it look easy. So right. I've been on over 1,200 podcast interviews.
Oh my God. I had no idea. Wow, so that's a lot.
I've met a lot of great people. I've been heard by, lots and lots of great people. But really where it came from was my experience with inbound marketing and specifically guest blogs. A dozen years ago, blogging was all the thing. If you said content, that meant blogs. And one of the hacks that was used was instead of writing your own blog and getting it seen by a handful of people, you could write a guest blog, put it up on, wherever your customers were, whatever big blog was there, and you get that know, like, and trust. So really back in 2013, 2014, I hypothesized that you could use guesting on a podcast almost like we used to use guest blogging. And so with that, tried it. It worked really well. I thought, it's just a niche. It's just a personality. Worked with some friends that I was in a mastermind with, helped them with it. They got similar results. And I just really saw that, wow, this is something. So at the urging of a lot of people, I wrote a book, I did a course, but Sarah, I never took the course out of beta because people were giving me good feedback on it, but nobody was actually using it. And the honest ones would come back and say, I just want to be the guest. You take care of all the rest. You've given me the cookbook. You've given me the videos. I want to do what I can do best, and that's talk with people. So that's really what started Interview Valet. We started to test it in 2015. 2016, we took it out of beta, and now here at the end of 2019, we've grown to a team of 18, all based in North America, but they all don't live in Kalamazoo, Michigan with me. We're a remote team, and we serve about 100 clients.
That's amazing. Wow. I really love how you made the connection with the guest blogging, because that was a big thing back in, I would say, probably 2012 till 2015, 16, maybe, right? That was like the way to get your content out there. And it probably still is. I'm sure that there's still, I still get blog requests, right? Guest blogging requests. I have actually kind of stopped doing that a long time ago. It's a lot of work because writing is one thing, but just, showing up and speaking is it's a different skill for sure. So it's interesting how you made that connection, and already back then you were like, maybe that's going to be the next thing. And it really turned out to be the next thing, right? So how many podcasts do we have nowadays? Like, what's the latest stats?
If you look at the Edison research from 2019, they say there's 750,000 podcasts out there, which sounds like an amazing number until you look at blogs. Blogs, I think it's 40 million blogs out there.
Okay.
And even the 750,000 sounds like a lot, but the people from Blueberry, which is a hosting service, came out and said, well, it's actually about 200,000 that have posted in the last 30 days. So there's a lot that are out there, but they may not be active. So the number is probably more like 200,000. Okay. The other thing that was interesting is that they do a report every year and says, how many downloads does the average podcast get, the top 1% get? And what's interesting is each year, the average number of downloads per podcast goes down, even though the listeners are going up. Right now in the US, they say 51% of the population listens to podcasts. And on average, they're above average income, above average education, and on average, they listen to 7 hours of content a week. So the number of people listening is going up, but the podcasts are becoming very niche and very focused. So it's not like the old days when we had 3 television networks and you had the choice of 3 to listen to or watch. It's sort of the same thing. Now there's more TV stations the same way. There's more podcasts. So people can actually choose the ones that they want to listen to. And I think that's amazing because unlike other medium, if somebody's listening to a podcast, that's 100% opt-in. It's not like, well, they got the email, but they didn't read it. Now, if they're listening to a podcast, they're listening to every word you say.
Would you also say that podcast listeners are more loyal maybe than blog readers or something like that?
I'd say they're more engaged and definitely more loyal would probably be a good word. I remember a client that we worked with, he was a sales rep. And he equated it to 20, 30 years ago when he first started out. He said, if he walked into somebody's office and he was selling most to C-level executives, he said, if they had books on their desk, he said, I knew that was my kind of customer. That was somebody that was looking for answers, wanted to be an early adopter, was trying to improve themselves and their business. And I think that's what we're seeing on podcast listeners also. I listen to 80s rock at times, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there's certain people that will just, listen to the old days. And there's other people that want to get ready for what's coming. And I think that's what we see in podcast listeners.
I just feel like because we're mostly listening probably on our mobile devices, and so we're subscribed through some kind of app, right? And then we get notified whenever there is a new podcast. Well, the ones that I have on my list, on my app, I listen to, not all of them, but almost all of them. So that's why I said I feel like I'm a very loyal listener to the ones that I have subscribed to.
And it's also very intimate. You feel like you know the people that you're listening to. There's a couple podcast conventions, the bigger ones, and it's always the most interesting thing where people will come up and meet the podcast host and, they've never quote unquote met them in real life before, but they want to hug them. They want to get a picture with them because this is a friend they listen to week in and week out. And they'll start asking them about, how's your dog doing? Is the construction outside of your house, is that finished now? And they know all these details just from listening in on the podcast. It's amazing, spooky in a little ways, but amazing.
Spooky, but no, it's great. I agree, because the ones I listen to, I also feel like, I know them, and it's like every week you're like, oh, there's this little detail about their life, and that makes it more interesting, right?
Right.
So now we talk mainly about the side from the host. So we know that, yes, there's still space to actually create your own podcast, because if we say, okay, there's about 200,000 podcasts versus 40 million blogs, well, there's still room to create your own podcast. And yet, I know that creating your own podcast can still be a little intimidating. Mainly when I speak to clients, it's mainly the tech that is worrisome, but then also the regularity and, getting the content. So it's still like a big undertaking to create your own podcast, right?
It is. You mentioned commitment there. When you start a podcast, people expect you to show up every week if you've got a weekly podcast. And if you miss one of those, you break trust with them. And so there's that commitment there. And a friend of mine shut down his podcast after 200 episodes. He got a dream job, was moving cities, and shut it down. And people's question was still, well, why did you quit it? Well, he's like, I didn't quit it. I just, everything runs its course. But people expect that regularity. Right. One of the things that I like about guesting, and I don't think it's an either or, I think it's a both. I think there's opportunity to be a guest and a host.
Right.
One of the things I love about being a guest is that you can do it on your schedule. So you can take a quarter off and nobody really notices from there. And you can also tap into other people's network. Sometimes we talk about podcasts as a digital stage, and then we've got the physical stages. And so if you think it that same way, yes, you could start your own conference and speak from the stage, and that's a great thing to do, but there's a whole lot of work to that. A lot of people will start speaking on other people's physical stages, and then maybe they'll launch their own, or they'll do both. And I really think that's what we're doing in podcasting also. And like you said, the technical issues, Sarah, all I have to do on this interview is show up and talk with you. And I thank you for all of the work you do afterwards. You're the one with the stress of remembering to hit the record button and getting it to your team to produce and put out there. So from the standpoint of the stress, I think it's a lot more on the host of the party, the host of the podcast, than it is on the guest.
Yeah, that's so true. You just take half an hour, 45 minutes out of your day, where for me, it's usually about 2 hours, just from my end, and then another 2 probably from the production team. So yeah, it is a bit of work to put together a podcast. That's for sure. So you were mentioning, yes, obviously there's an easier kind of entry into guesting. Talk to us about when we were offline, we were talking about the human connection. So where do you see this human connection being established as the guest on a show, right? Obviously with the host probably, but also with the audience.
Well, and I think it's with everyone, right? Mm-hmm. This is a very intimate and powerful medium. And I love a quote that Rand Fishkin said. He started a company called SEO Moz. And he said, the best way to sell something today is not to sell anything, but to earn the respect, awareness, and trust of those who might buy. And this is such a powerful tool that if you use it wrong, you can harm yourself. You can harm your brand. It will expose if you're trying to make a transaction or if you're trying to build a relationship. And I think that's always what we need to focus on. This is not an infomercial. This is a chance for people to know, like, and trust you. And for the last, 50 years, maybe it was TV, maybe it started in radio, we had this idea of bigger is better. And now we're at the point with the internet where we can talk to billions of people, but billions of people don't want to listen to us. So we need to find those people that we can add value to, those people that we can serve, that we really work well together with. I think today the paradigm has changed. We're in a world of abundance, not a world of scarcity. And so we don't need more clients. We need better clients. And so from that standpoint, I think it's very important to know who you are, to communicate with that. I always say when people hear me on a podcast interview, there's 3 reactions they could have to me. The first one is, Tom is an idiot. And I do not disagree with them. I won't argue with them, right? But if they think that, I can tell you what, I don't want to change their mind. I don't want to change who I am. And we won't work well together. So God love them. There is someone that they can work with much better than me. Mm-hmm. The other ones are like, that was interesting, but I don't need it right now. Well, same way. That is great. I hope you got some good information out of this. The third ones are like, wow, Tom understands me. He works with people like me. He solves those problems. I want to work with him. Those are the people we want to connect with. It's like connecting with better leads, better customers, not just more.
And I would add to the last one, not just Tom understands me and he knows my problem, but also we share similar values, because yes. I got to really know Tom as a person. And you said that before. It's like we need to know who we are, what we stand for, our values. That brings me to the next question. So what do we need to prepare to be ready for guesting? Because first off, it feels like, you just, need to show up, right? Because you don't need any tools, or maybe you need a good mic, but otherwise you just show up. But I'm sure that there's, showing up and showing up. So tell us what we need to be prepared for.
And we talked here about, the host, the guest showing up for the party, showing up for the stage, be it digital or physical. And it breaks my heart at times when I see people not respecting the audience, the platform, the stage. Think about it. When you're talking to someone, it's very easy. All you need is a good microphone, a decent internet connection, and a computer. And you can connect with Zoom, Skype, Zencaster, however they're going to record it. But you're also talking to hundreds or thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people. And none of us would walk on a physical stage just winging it, not knowing what we were talking about, not having value to add, not knowing who the audience is. If you're going to be on a podcast interview, you better be prepared for who the host is, what the show is about. Definitely listen to it 3 or 4 episodes so that you get the flavor of what kind of questions they ask. A comedian can be funny at a Las Vegas bar. They can also be funny in a bingo hall with a bunch of nuns, but they better know which audience they're walking into. Mm-hmm. So in the same way within a podcast, it breaks my heart sometimes when I hear people get asked the same question, week after week, and the hosts ask them the same question. And when she asks them the question, somebody will go, Sarah, I've never thought about that. They just insulted the audience and the host by saying, I've never even listened to this podcast before. Right. So prepare for it, just like you would a digital stage. Have some things that you can offer people that add value, that really can help them because no matter how great of a communicator we are, there's no way we're going to be able to share everything we know and to help people in just the 30 minutes.
That's so true. And I, again, if I may, I would add, since podcasting is really about storytelling as well, right? I would really consider what kind of stories you can weave into your topic, because if it's just, otherwise there's a chance that it sounds like ad content, like we mentioned before. It's like just like reading off your website, basically. So that's not how you come over as relatable and approachable and personable. So prepare some of your stories that you can weave into the content when you're talking.
It's so true, because in this medium, it's not like you've got a PowerPoint to put up all the numbers and the graphs.
Yeah.
You've got stories to tell. And there's a story, a case study that I always reference, or not always, but often reference. And there was a gentleman we worked with. I love accountants because they know their numbers. And Craig Cody was a New York City detective. He retired. He became a CPA, an accountant, and worked with small businesses. Well, we got him on podcasts, and he publicly said that at a year that he got 600% return on investment, and at 2 years got 1,200% return on investment.
Wow.
And it's a great story, right? But afterwards, I said this at an event, and then came back and said, well, what do you remember about this story? And the funny part is people remembered, oh, he was a cop, he became an accountant, he helped people, and he got really good results.
Right. Yeah. They don't remember the specifics.
Nobody remembers the numbers.
No.
And so from that standpoint, if you were just throwing out the numbers without the context, without the story, it would have been meaningless.
Right. Yeah. So true. So how do we then get on podcasts? That's probably what's on everybody's mind now. It's like, well, sounds good, but how do you get on podcasts?
I put yourself in Sarah's shoes right now.
Right.
If you were a host, who would you want to have on your podcast? And I would argue there's 3 types of people. You want to have your friends of friends, and people you want to be your friends.
Right.
Nowhere on there does it say cold pitches.
Right.
So if you know the podcaster, you can reach out. If you know someone who knows someone that knows the podcaster, that's really where we come in, doing the introductions. Or you could even present yourself as someone that the host would want to be friends with. And the way to do this, Gary Vaynerchuk talks about jab, 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 right hook. I always look at it as serve, 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 ask. So listen to a
prefer that language, Tom.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't like hitting customers nor shoving them through a funnel. Both are very dehumanizing. But think about it. You listen to the podcast. All right. Think, is this some show that I would be good at? Well, leave the host a rating and review. We all listen for our name. Hosts will look at ratings and reviews. Share it on social media. Make some comments. It's that give. We all listen to our names on social media too. So if all of a sudden you start sharing and promoting a podcast, the host will know who you are. Then you can reach out to her and say, Sarah, I love the podcast. I really enjoyed this episode where you talked about this. I can offer this, and I really think that it could help your audience, and I would love to add value to them. You see that give, give, give. And then all of a sudden they'll be asking you to be on the podcast. The idea of reaching out to the host and saying, I've got a book coming out and I want to sell it to your audience does not work. I always joke that I get pitched probably twice a day to be on my podcast.
Right.
The funny part is I don't have a podcast. Every one of them says the same thing. Dear Tom, I love your show and would love to be a guest. And it's like, you just proved to me that you've never even listened to my show. You don't know who I am. And one of the top podcasters out there, I had dinner with him a couple of weeks ago at a conference, and he said he gets pitched 500 times a week to be on his show, and they don't even open those. He will only personally invite people that he knows, that are friends of friends, or people that he wants to be friends.
Yeah, such a good reminder because I'm getting those emails too. And to be honest, a lot of times it's from some kind of media person who's promoting the book of her client. And it's just the most impersonal message. And, it's almost like to the owner of this podcast. It's like, really? Wow. I feel sorry for the person who pays you because clearly you're not very good at your job. But yeah, it's so true. It's all about relationships, comes back to that, right?
It does. And I've even taken some of those that I have gotten back there and responded to the person was being pitched and tried to tell them it's about relationships, not transactions.
Yeah.
And while they may say, well, I sent 1,000 emails and I got 2 yeses, and it only took me 1 click, I would say there are 998 people that you ticked off or that are sharing your email as a joke. Podcasters talk to podcasters. And it's that thing, I think we, as marketers, as business owners, maybe even as humans, should take the Hippocratic oath just like doctors do. First do no harm.
It's so crazy, right? To them, it's like, well, it still worked. I sent out 1,000, I got 2, and it didn't cost me any work. So I guess it's working for me. It's just so sad. It is, right? What works actually for me often is, since I also have a podcast, I invite guests on my show, and then sometimes they have their own show and then I end up on their show. So it's really, the podcast hosting is also very good for building relationships. So it's really not the either or, but the and that counts as well.
Yeah. And Sarah, you hit on something there. And today, more than ever, I think the richness of our lives is the richness of our relationships. And that richness is, bank account is a very small part of that. But those friends that you can reach out to invite on your show, to ask a question, just when you're in a new town, to know somebody in that town, to me, that's a rich life. And you don't get that from transactions or sending 1,000 emails and getting 2 desperate people to say yes.
Yeah. All right. So how do we then turn these listeners, our ideal listeners, because we've done the research and we reached out to podcast hosts where we think that the ideal listener is in the audience. So we don't just pitch any podcast. We really did our homework. How do we then turn these ideal listeners into ideal clients? Like, how do we bring them into our world?
I love that question of not how do you bring them into your world, not how do I get them into my funnel. And that's really, it's subtle, but it's so true. And I look at it as, how do you turn them from being just a passive visitor to an active visitor to your site, and an engaged customer? Right. Well, you've got to give them a reason. You've got to help them along, right? So give them some kind of value to take the next step. And we've done a lot of testing behind this. And often people will say, give them one offer, give them one call to action. But what we have seen is that when you're talking on a podcast, when you're talking from a stage, you want to meet people where they are. You want to give them a small way to say yes, a medium way, and then, if they come ready to engage, well, don't slow them down in a funnel. So the small yes could be something that doesn't take a lot of their time or money. It could be a checklist. So I'll pull back the curtain here. My small yes that I often use it's just an infographic. 6 steps to get on your first podcast. We talk a little bit about them here. People won't remember them, right? But if you want to download the 6 steps to get on your first podcast, I give that away. The medium yes for me is something that's going to take a little bit more time, right? A little bit more investment. So that could be a video to build that relationship. You've heard me, but you've never seen me. Maybe there's some training, some case studies. The one that I use is often just a free copy of my book. Podcast Guest Profits. I've sold lots of them, but I give more of them away because as an author, I just want the ideas out there. So that's the medium yes. And then the heck yes, if they've listened to you for 30 minutes and are like, wow, I want to engage. Well, maybe that's when you say that there's a program there. Whatever is that next step. For us, it's, well, let's set up a discovery call. Let's jump on the phone to see how you could use this. So you give them a small yes, a medium yes, and a heck yes. Then the other thing the testing has shown is to send them to a dedicated, we call it a welcome page. So it's on your website. It's not a squeeze page. It's not a landing page. Give me your email address or else. It's a page to greet them. So if you've listened to me here, you've never seen me. You've never seen my website. But guess what? Sarah's your friend. So as you come to this page, and I'll build the page and you can look at what a page looks like. It'll be interviewvalet.com/GBRS. So from the Gentle Business Revolution Show. And so the first thing that loads on that page is the picture of the artwork, Sarah's picture. And then there's some information, some text, and then the three offers that I talk about, the small, the medium, and the heck yes. So, the checklist, the free book, and the chance to sign up for a free call. And also in there, put your social media, put your email, that sort of thing. I cringe sometimes as I'm running along, listen to a podcast at 2x, and as I'm running at half x, and somebody is sharing their phone number, their email, their Instagram, all these other things. And I'm like, I'm not going to remember anything. You give me one easy thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, as a parent, I know if you give a child, 10 choices for dessert, you won't get a happy child. You'll get a meltdown. Give them one or two things to do.
Wow, that's great advice. It's funny because I wrote down a question and then you answered it later. So the three yeses are on the same page, right? You have them one underneath the other.
Correct, because you want to make it easy for people. The other thing on those welcome pages is have all the navigation. So if they want to look around your site and learn more, allow them to, right? Why wouldn't you? The other thing that's really important for the welcome page is this is evergreen content. So you want to lead them to a place that is going to be evergreen. So if I just said, come to interviewvalet.com. Well, we're recording this at the end of 2019. I guarantee you right now, in 2022, someone is listening to this podcast. And if they went back to the homepage, my homepage is probably going to change in the next 3 years. Mm-hmm. And so if they went there and they didn't see what I had talked about, the offers that I had made, the next steps, well, they'd get frustrated. They'd leave. It's called bouncing in the industry. So why, with evergreen content, would you not send them to an evergreen landing page?
Yeah, that's really long-term thinking. I like it because often we just think, right now in the moment. But yeah, you need to plan because these podcasts are evergreen and available on iTunes forever and ever. So do plan ahead. Yeah. Wow. That's great information. And I love the language you're using, leading, not driving. And, it's all about words, right? Words make such a big difference in how we talk and in our marketing and communication. So thank you. Tom, before we come to the end here, I want to ask you how in your business you market with empathy and integrity, like we got a good sense of it on this conversation. But when you think about emails that you're sending out or communication on the web, how are you aware of things that do create maybe anxiety and scarcity feelings, and how do you apply a different approach in your business?
I would say I've got two great business advisors, and I always think, what would they say? And one of them is my grandfather. God rest his soul. He was a great businessman, but in a very small town. And I saw how he built relationships, and he was always focused on long term. And, Cunningham Service Station was a great business, and everybody trusted him. He got word of mouth. He had a great business. And the other great business advisor I have is my granddaughter. She's 5 years old, and I know that someday she's going to be listening to some of my podcasts. And I want to make sure whatever I say on the podcast that she would be proud of, and that I teach her the lessons that I would want to see her use, to not use people, but to value them. All the things we're trying to teach a 5-year-old, I want to make sure that she could look at the way I run my business, the way I run my marketing, and learn those lessons and see those lessons through it. I always say the worst business advice that I ever got was from my grandfather. I was 17 years old, getting ready to go into the Navy, and sat down. It was the only wrong thing that old Irishman had ever told me. And we were sitting down for a beer. I think he thought it was the first beer I'd ever had. But he told me, choose carefully who you drink with, because you can't choose who you work with. And I always remembered that. And for him, it was a reality, right? He was a mechanic in a small town. If you weren't within probably 5 miles of his service station, you weren't a customer. But for us, it's different. So I want to make sure that I choose carefully who I work with, because I want that long-term relationship with them. I don't want to keep them from having a relationship with somebody that could serve them better. But if we're a great fit, and I bring the best out in them, they bring the best out in me, that's what business is about. Today it's never been easier to sell something online. Just be a penny cheaper than the next person on Amazon and you'll sell it. Guess what? Somebody else is going to beat you out by a penny. Right. So not thinking about the transactions, not thinking about selling something, but thinking about adding value and adding value long term. And to me, that's what building a business is.
So true. And that's why you're such a good fit for this podcast, because it's all about long term. It's about human connections. It's about sustainability, because if you listen to the hustlers, then you gotta keep hustling. But I say that there's another way. So thank you so much, Tom. I so much enjoyed our conversation, and you delivered so much value. Tell our listeners where they can find your 3 yeses.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And if you want to just see what a welcome page looks like so you can copy it and use it, if you want to get in touch with me, just go to interviewvalet.com/GBRS from Gentle Business Revolution Show. And there will be that download on 6 secrets to get on your first podcast. It'll be a copy of my book, a free copy there. And then it'll have all of the information so we can jump on a call and talk and see how you could use podcast interview marketing to grow your business. And all of that will be at interviewvalet.com/GBRS.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on to the show again, Tom. And I know we stay in touch because we're friends now, right?
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time today, Tom.
Thank you, Sarah.
That's it for this episode of the Gentle Business Revolution podcast. Please find the show notes at sarahsantacroce.com/GBR14, and also check out Tom's website at interviewvalet.com/GBRS. I also highly recommend his book, Podcast Guest Profits, if you're interested in being a guest on more podcasts. Next week, I'm back with a solo episode, and I'll cover another aspect of the P of partnerships. I hope you'll join me on this journey to a kinder marketing paradigm, and please invite your friends to join us by sharing this podcast or the Gentle Business Manifesto with them. Both can be found at thegentlebusinessrevolution.com. And just a reminder, there's no opt-in for the PDF of the Gentle Business Manifesto, so it's just an invitation to immediately download and read it without giving me an email address at this point. So let's be the change we want to see in the world. I look forward to talking to you again next week. Take care.